Okay, so just to recap again, this activity of Learning Outcome 1 is to color code two different maps to show a change in the political boundaries for different ethnic groups before and after World War I. This activity is a challenge for students because even though it's coloring, it's noticing the differences. You're comparing, contrasting, and so this is a good example of the social cognitive theory of building self-efficacy for students, because through modeling and instruction, we can help them to improve on this skill, which is so needed in the state of Michigan. So, Trenton here, what noticing did you have, Trenton, as you were creating your map?
Notice that Finland was never a country until 1919.
Right. So after World War I and the Treaty of Versailles. Good. And what did you notice, Kristen, about Germany?
Germany definitely got a little smaller after World War I.
Yes.
And Poland developed.
And Poland was created. Good. So as I stated before, this would take about 49 minutes. We would have a lot more discussion around this, but once again, the idea is the teacher models Germany first, and then moves into Austria-Hungary and other countries that existed prior to World War I, and then after World War I, and those changes. And this would be an attempt to encourage self-efficacy and improve that. The second learning outcome has to do with also developing self-efficacy for students, and this is even a more rigorous activity, and this involves using primary and secondary sources. This is very important for AP History. This is important for the IB program for history, and so there's several things I'm asking the students to do. I'm going to model for them something called the OPVL strategy. This is a strategy that is used to help analyze primary and secondary sources. So what the students have is they have two things. They have the OPVL document analysis sheet, and they have a secondary source about World War II and a primary source on the Atlantic Charter. We're going to focus on the Atlantic Charter in this class. If this was a 49-minute class again, the first portion of the class would be going over the secondary source first to give context and background. Then the second point is to look at and understand, as it states here, how the U.S. responded after World War II broke out in Europe by looking at something called the Atlantic Charter. So, as you look at your source, you have several different things on your document analysis sheet. The first thing you have, it says the title of the document. So take a minute and see if you can write down what is the title of the document. Also keep in mind and notice what is the date of the document. So can anyone find the date of the document? Jenna?
1941.
1941. Any specific date in 1941? Do you see anything else?
August.
August of 1941. Do you notice where? So this is what we call the origin. So as we're looking at primary sources, a very important thing for students is to determine the origin of the document. So, who created this document?
The U.S. Department of State.
Okay, where'd you find that?
The bottom.
Good, you found that note. The U.S. Department of State. Good. Who else could have written this document, specifically?
Franklin D. Roosevelt and Winston Churchill.
Very good. So this is actually a document created by Roosevelt and Churchill in August of 1941. And what you have been reading, Kristen, is the narrative that many times on the AP tests and the IB tests, they always give a little background first, and then the actual document itself is on the back side, which is right here, which is actually the narrative text from the actual charter that they created. Purpose. What is the intended audience? Or who is the intended audience, and what do you think the author's message is? I'll give you a minute to think about that. as you're thinking about that, the other thing for origin I want to make sure we're clear on is we know who created it, Churchill and Roosevelt. Is there anything else we need to know about the authors that would be pertinent to our evaluation?
They were the President of the United States and then was it Prime Minister?
Prime
of
Minister.
Great Britain?
Right. Very good. So they were the heads of state, they were the leaders, and so it gives validity to the document right away. And this is what what I'm doing is what is called a think aloud, and I'm helping students build their self-confidence and self-efficacy on analyzing a primary source, which is very challenging. So let's go down to value. Find a quote from the document that answers this question. What was going on in history at the time of the piece was created, and how does this piece accurately reflect it? Now, this is a challenge because you don't have a lot of time to read it, but there's several different quotes in there that would give real good context for that.
Oh, of course.
If anyone can find one real quick.
It condemned aggression, affirmed the right of self-determination, and endorsed the principles of collective security and arms regulation. No, that's not a good one, sorry. Foundation.
Trenton?
It
That's
was several months before the attack on Pearl Harbor.
Very good. So as we're talking about this, as we're looking at this event, this was a meeting in the North Atlantic between Roosevelt and Churchill prior to the U.S. even being involved in World War II. The war was going on in Europe, but the United States was not involved. So putting that in context, that gives value to the document. And what limitations could be on this document? So, meaning, what holes could be in the author's argument?
Like bias? Because it's,
Exactly, bias. Could there be bias in a primary source?
oh yes.
Why?
Because it's simply from the perspective of these two countries in specifics.
Very good. So as we're wrapping up here, we would have a lot more dialogue and discussion around this primary and secondary source, but once again, just to be clear, the purpose of these two learning outcomes is to bring about Bandura's concept of social cognitive theory, and specifically the focus on self-efficacy, building self-confidence through modeling and I believe it's coping modeling as students work together. Thank you.